Okay, what's up, friendos? Welcome back. There's a crazy scenario playing out here, and I just wanted to cover it because I followed the initial situation quite closely. Never released a video because it was at a time I wasn't really releasing YouTube videos. But basically, if you don't know, there's a YouTuber called Karl Jobst. I don't know if that's specifically how you pronounce his name, but we'll just call him Karl from now. And a person called Billy Mitchell, who is renowned for some arcade high scores, which a lot of people think he cheated in. Whether he did or not, I don't know. I've not done the forensic detailing here, but it seems like the general consensus is that Billy has cheated in some high scores, right? That's what people think of him. That's his reputation, which plays a factor discussing this case. So what happened was Karl Jobst, big YouTuber who was making videos about speedrunning, cheating, video games. Like, I've followed Karl for a while. I've watched his videos for a while. Before this whole situation played out, and he started covering Billy, and then Billy eventually sued him, and people thought that the lawsuit was about Karl saying that Billy cheated in Donkey Kong, which would be a ridiculous lawsuit, but Billy sues a lot of people, so not that ridiculous in this case. But that's not what the lawsuit was about. The lawsuit was about later videos in which this has been going on for like 6 years, by the way. Karl was covering him like 5-6 years ago. And it only got resolved last year when Karl lost the defamation lawsuit to Billy in Australia. And of course, the news is that Karl's now suing Billy. We'll get that out of the way first. In fact, let's do the lawsuit first and why. I recorded a video about this yesterday, and it was an hour long. And then I got to the very bottom of the lawsuit and I was like, oh, that changes literally everything. One line of text changes everything about this situation. Karl has filed this lawsuit on behalf of himself, what's referred to as pro se. He's representing himself as his own lawyer. Why is this a bad idea? A lot of reasons, but there are specific reasons you pay lawyers to do lawyer work, and one of them being when you file a lawsuit against somebody, obviously everything's a varying degree of complex in the legal system, but when you file a lawsuit against somebody, the majority of like the money that you're paying them goes into their expertise of like what case law applies to what you're saying and what you're doing. And if you have a legal filing that has no citations, no case law, no footnotes about any of the legal arguments you're making, you are going to get fucking bodied by a real lawyer. They're not just going to put pillows on their fists because you're filing on behalf of yourself. This is a legal matter. You are arguing legal matters you don't understand. And it wouldn't surprise me if Karl had used some form of AI to write this, because he specifically a year or so ago, when the judge ruled against him in Australia, said, oh, we fed all the transcripts and legal documents into AI, and AI said we would win. And even if we didn't win, I wouldn't have to pay very much money, which none of those things happened. So clearly he likes using that stuff. Maybe this is the case, maybe it isn't. Maybe he wrote all this himself. It's structured reasonably well, but again, there's no citations or anything. And one thing you have to understand is that Karl lost defamation in Australia, which is easier to prove defamation than in the US. The US is notoriously difficult to win defamation cases, especially when both people involved are public figures. And there's a reason for this. I think it was a Supreme Court case between like a media company. It was New York Times versus Sullivan. It was in 1964, and this basically implemented what's referred to as actual malice as a rule. And it was a public official cannot win in a defamation case unless they prove the statement was made with actual malice. So this applies to also journalists, people doing YouTube, people that are in the public interest. So this is why it's so difficult to win a defamation case in the US. You not only, you can prove that the thing was damaging, as in it caused you damage, you lost money, you lost income, whatever it's going to be, it impacted your life in some way materially, and that it was 100% categorically false, and you can still lose, and often do, because you haven't been able to prove actual malice. This is such an incredibly high bar that suing somebody in the US over defamation is a very bad idea, especially if you're going to do it yourself with no legal team. That basically makes this whole thing not worth going over in detail. I will go over some of the parts that are the most important, where I think Karl has a point, because you're probably, if not, going to think I'm biased, because I'm about to go over the context of why Karl lost the defamation lawsuit in Australia, and why he should have lost the defamation lawsuit in Australia, and why he probably deserved to have lost, and why he now filed for bankruptcy and he's doing this. But one thing I want to get out the way real quick is this whole situation is stupid. This is, you'll quickly find out, this is the Spider-Man meme of the Spider-Men pointing at each other in a circle. They are doing the exact same things to each other, and this is like a death feud that's going to turn these people essentially into, like, it's just a spectacle. It's like some Wings of Redemption lolcow type shit once you eventually get into it, because for Karl, you made videos about this guy and made hundreds of thousands of dollars for years, for like 5-6 years, talking shit about him, calling him a liar, a fraud, a con man, all these things. And then he took you to court and took you to the cleaners. He beat you fair and square. You lost. You did the things he said you did. And then you owe him $1 million, $1 million Australian dollars. You filed for bankruptcy. And throughout the entire process of this lawsuit playing out, you made videos constantly ridiculing him and saying how it was baseless and how he was definitely going to lose and blah, blah, blah. And then you lost. And your response is now to say that he's inflicted emotional harm on you, infliction of emotional distress, by making memes about you on his Twitter account and posting like pictures of you and making Billy has a hot sauce company and he's making the codes for like special discounts like Karl Lost and stuff like that, which is obviously a play on Karl's name. And apparently this has upset you so much you're filing a lawsuit against him, even though you've said you have no money and you've filed bankruptcy because you have no money to pay Billy the money. But then you're going to enter into like a lengthy legal process where obviously at the very beginning of a legal situation, you can't say who's going to win and who's going to lose. It takes years to get to the point where you've seen enough evidence to make any kind of determination. We're seeing that play out in the Ashes of Creation situation right now with Intrepid, where it just goes back and forth, and we're not even at the fact-finding stage yet in that case, because it's all just initially procedural, which is very difficult to understand for many people, and that's why lawyers exist. But at this stage, with like the odds stacked against you, if you already lost a lawsuit and you have financial constraints, clearly, you say you have no money and you're bankrupt, you are filing yourself and you're doing it in an American court. You are, if this goes to trial, you are going to end up paying his fees again. And we know for a fact that Billy it pays high lawyer fees because you just had to fucking pay them as you've lost the Australian court case. So if you're bankrupt, why are you trying to re-bankrupt yourself again? Like, it makes no sense. Leave it. Why do you care if Billy's saying bad things about you online? Because I'll be very clear here. Billy is saying damaging things about Karl. Absolutely, and we'll go into them to show you that this is the case. And probably damaging untrue things. Does that necessarily mean that you'll win? Probably not if you're representing yourself in a Florida court for defamation. But the people who believe and follow Billy are not your viewers. The people who you already lost credibility from are the people who realized that you lied about Billy, right? And this is not something I'm saying because I don't like Karl. I watched his videos for a long time. I would have thought, based on what was presented to me publicly without following the case initially, that Karl was going to win and Billy was just filing frivolous lawsuits because he called him a cheater. But what Karl said, which we'll go over in a second, was wrong. And he had no basis for saying it. And that's why he lost. So basically, you are suing somebody because they're damaging your YouTube earnings and career and future and stuff. But him saying these things on Twitter are not the things that are damaging you. The court case you lost for the things you did is the thing that has damaged your credibility. Which, if you win this lawsuit, is not going to change that. There might be some people that don't understand that these two are different matters. That are like, oh yeah, Billy won this time, so clearly the other case was just silly. But facts are facts. It doesn't change what was said before, and none of this argument in here changes anything about what you lost the lawsuit for. They're two totally different matters. So we'll go over this again in a second. But basically, what people thought Billy was suing him over was calling him a cheater. But this statement here that was in a video is actually what Billy was suing Karl over. Quote, and this is from Karl's video titled "The Biggest Con Men in Video Game History Strike Again." Billy also sued YouTuber Apollo Legend for $1 million. I haven't spoken about this publicly, but this lawsuit ultimately ended with Apollo giving in and settling with Mitchell. He was forced to remove all of his videos about Mitchell's cheating and paid him a large sum of money. That last part didn't happen. There was no large sum of money. This left him deeply in debt, which required him to find extra work, but with his ongoing health issues, this was all too much of a burden, and he ultimately took his own life. Not that Billy would even care, though. In fact, when Billy Mitchell thought Apollo died earlier, he expressed joy at the thought. The lawsuit against Apollo was just as frivolous as the rest, and Apollo definitely would have won in court, but again, he was extremely ill and couldn't handle the ongoing stress. So, there's a thing that courts use called the reasonable person test, and I agree with this. Some people are not going to agree, and Karl argued in court that this doesn't mean what it sounds like, and this doesn't mean that he's assigning any kind of blame to Billy Mitchell of like, oh, he forced him to settle and pay loads of money, so therefore he had a hand in him losing his life. Like, I read things and things make sense in the way that they logically follow of like how things make sense. The court argued this exact same point. You read this and it reads as if the entire setup of the context is Apollo Legend had health issues and he settled with Billy with a large sum of money, which caused him to be in deep debt and required him to find extra work. But because of not being able to find extra work due to his health, he took his own life because of this burden. All too much of a burden. This is saying that Billy Mitchell had some direct impact due to a thing that didn't happen, factually didn't happen. There was no large sum of money settlement. And that's why he was sued, and that's why he lost. And I'll play you a clip here just so we're on the same page of why this whole thing confused me, why people was like, oh, Karl never lied about any of this situation and he was always honest about what was going on, etc.
Okay, but time went on, and eventually, without a single source, except a now deleted post on Reddit. Now deleted post.
I just want to say, who is this lady? Because she is deeply enthralled in what Billy's saying. She's loving every fucking second of this.
Was his only source where he blamed me for taking the life of another human being and for what I did to him. And I said, that's it.
Billy Mitchell is referring to the YouTube.
So let's just get this clear in case you missed what he said. He's saying Karl made this claim without any sources, and the only source he had was somebody posting on Reddit. An anonymous account on Reddit posted about this, and then Karl used it in a video for the basis of that statement that I just read you, which is the statement that he was sued over. This is Karl's response to Billy saying this.
YouTuber Apollo Legend, who tragically took his own life in December of 2020. I won't go into specifics about this particular point because it does relate to his ongoing lawsuit against me. But again, everything he just said is a lie. I didn't say what he claims that I said, and my source for what I did say was not just a deleted post on Reddit. Billy knows all of my sources because I gave them to him as part of the proceedings. And once the lawsuit is over, which should be hopefully very soon, all of the details will be made public.
So that's Karl saying, I actually had sources. That isn't the only thing that I had that told me this thing that I said that was the foundation of the defamatory statement that he sued me over. Would it interest you to learn that this was in fact untrue? And this is in the judgment of the case. So this is at the end when the judge is going over what has been presented. In his evidence, Mr. Jobst was asked about his basis for stating that Apollo Legend had paid Mr. Mitchell a large sum of money. Apart from Apollo Legend's public statement about his settlement, which of course didn't include any statement about large money, Mr. Jobst said he was also aware of a post on Reddit that had been made several days before the settlement became public, in which the person posting said something to the effect of Karl's playing a dangerous game. Billy forced Apollo Legend to settle and pay him money. So this was the only thing that he had, and you've just seen on video Billy saying this is the only thing he had, Karl saying no, that's not the only thing I had, actually you're lying, I had other stuff. And I want you to understand that when you are defending a legal case for defamation, in Australia, you have like 10 defenses you can use. There's like 10 of them. You can go look them up. One of them is absolute truth, obviously, like in all defamation cases. The thing you said were true, so it's not fucking defamation. And this is, you just win because what you're saying is true. One is called contextual truth, which is the only defense that was available to Karl. The reason this was the only defense available to him, because if there was another defense that was, I can't remember the wording of the actual legal term, but it's essentially, I did an investigation as a journalist, and my investigation led me to this, and I did my due diligence enough to the point where the sources lied to me. This is what made sense to me at the time, and I did enough that would hold up in court that made me come to this conclusion. Couldn't use that defense because he just saw a Reddit post and then used it to say that Billy Mitchell had a hand in this man taking his life, which is a crazy claim to make about somebody just because they've cheated at video games. I think that's a fairly reasonable take, and that's the take that the court had. So in the defenses that Karl could use, he used contextual truth. Contextual truth in this context is essentially your reputation is already so bad that even if what I said about you was untrue, it doesn't matter because it doesn't harm your reputation further because of your reputation already being so bad. I'll give you a very simple, I guess, analogy for this one that's really over the top. So in this example, let's say you're a convicted murderer, and I say you're a murderer and you stole my newspaper last Monday. Then in terms of contextual truth, they're going to look at what is your reputation, what do people think of you. If people know that you're a murderer, if that's proven, then me saying you also stole a newspaper is so less serious. You know, if you put those next to each other, somebody stole a newspaper and somebody's a murderer, is me saying that you stole a newspaper and that being untrue going to further damage the reputation of a murderer? Essentially, if your reputation's already so bad in something that's considerably worse, does the law care whether or not you add like a fucking, you know, a little bit of lemon zest to it? This is referring to Australian law. I don't know how it is for other places because I only looked up this specific defense in Australia. Essentially, the super simple is if the main part of what you're saying is true, the little tiny details extra or smaller imputations don't really matter as long as they're not worse than the main thing. In Karl's case, he was trying to argue that people think you cheated at Donkey Kong, so me saying you potentially contributed to somebody taking their own life doesn't damage your reputation, which is, it's clearly untrue, isn't it? Because I think most reasonable people would think, what's worse here? Being responsible for another human taking their life, cheating at Donkey Kong, right? It doesn't work. But that was basically the only defense that was really available to Karl if you look up what you can defend yourself with, because what he said wasn't true. He didn't do his due diligence in any kind of investigation of doing this, and the others didn't apply, right? It was just this. And he lost. He lost based on this. It's really that simple. And there are some fucky elements of this, such as he was told this was untrue, and he unpublished the section of the video that he said this, and then he republished it, and then he kept doubling down on it, like Billy Pacman claims he will sue me for saying Apollo Legend paid him money. I removed that portion from my video, not because it's wrong, but because it isn't the issue I want to go to court over. I'd rather him sue me over the fake Donkey Kong scores. And then when he was told, oh, you know, you should apologize, he put the apology at the back end of an unrelated video that's 30 minutes long, that's about Dark Souls, that doesn't mention Billy Mitchell at all. And then the apology is at the very end in the last couple minutes, not on the thumbnail, he's not in the title. So the apology seems like it's kind of hidden at the back end of this video. So there's a bunch of fucky stuff here that Karl lost, and he probably reasonably deserved to lose, right? That's just my assessment, and obviously the court thinks that that's the case too. So as a result, we now have this, where Karl is suing Billy for a lot of the same reasons that Billy sued him. Claims that he's saying are false. And some of these in here actually have merit, that they do look to be false, and that Billy is making them knowing that they're false. Because, for instance, Billy is saying that Karl essentially scammed his audience for hundreds of thousands of dollars. You can see here, this is a quote from an X post, aka Twitter, from Billy that says, "I lied for 4 years, scammed $200,000, went bankrupt and lost every shred of credibility to my name, but at least I'm probably too much of a lazy, broken, unethical scumbag to ever fully pay King Billy's $1 million. I win." Obviously, anybody calling themselves King, probably something going on there. But obviously what he's saying here is mostly protected opinion, other than I scammed my fans for $200,000. And what is the basis of him saying this? He's saying Karl scammed his fans for $200,000 because a lot of his fans contributed to the Kickstarter. I said Kickstarter here, but I mean GoFundMe, obviously. Not knowing that the Kickstarter was about this specific thing that Karl said that was untrue. And if he explained all that context, would they have donated that money to his legal fees? I don't know. I'm not a fucking clairvoyant, but that's the basis of why Billy has said this about Karl. Karl's evidence that there was no scam is that the money went to the legal fund, which he said it was going to the legal fund. He just didn't go into detail of what exactly the legal complaint was over. And then there's some stuff in here about like the GoFundMe campaign, where there was a $50,000 GoFundMe campaign that was for other people that were being sued by Billy. Yes, Billy sues lots of people. And Billy included this in like, oh, he scammed Notch for $300,000, because if you didn't know, Notch paid a good chunk of Karl's legal fees. And then there was this $50,000 one, then the $200,000 one he raised, and he's saying, no, he scammed $500,000 because that money didn't go where it was supposed to. But Billy knows that $50,000 went where it was supposed to, because the person the money was raised for was a witness that took the stand while Billy was in the court and said that he was giving the money for his legal battle with Billy. So that money wasn't scammed. It wasn't misappropriated. It wasn't used for some other reason. And Billy knows that. He knows that that's the case. And then basically there's just a big argument in here about because Karl in his GoFundMe said that there was going to be multiple lawsuits against him from Billy. Billy's saying, oh, he should have known there wasn't going to be multiple and there was only going to be one. And then there's just like a fucking 2 pages about how that wouldn't have been true. One of the biggest points in here is that Karl is making like a really big deal about Billy reposting a Reddit thread where it says the plot thickens. And I'll show you the exhibit here. He reposted a Reddit thread and all he said was the plot thickens. And this Reddit thread was a Discord screenshot of Karl basically talking about how he couldn't pay back Billy after he lost the lawsuit because he has no money. The funds are like, the company doesn't make money. His YouTube channel doesn't make money. He has mortgages on his house and his houses are half owned by his wife and blah, blah, blah. And the people in the Reddit thread were calling him a fraud and saying it was bankruptcy fraud. But all that Billy said was the plot thickens. And he's saying this is him defaming him in some way. This is like him reflecting how Mitchell's post conveyed and reinforced an allegation of criminal wrongdoing to its audience. He just said the plot thickens. Like, this is a stretch in my opinion. And this is like a big basis of the defamation claim. And he specifically later on goes into actually that Billy said specifically, oh, Karl didn't commit bankruptcy fraud. As you'll see here, he says, during the December 4th live stream, a caller asked, how do you feel about Karl giving everything to his wife so he doesn't have to pay you? Mitchell responded, that's not what happened at all. If he did that, he'd go to jail. Mitchell's statement directly contradicts the allegation he had previously published and endorsed on May 18th that Jobst had moved assets to his wife to avoid paying creditors. He didn't make that. You can see here the date of what he's using. The May 18th is this section where he just said the plot thickens. So a lot of this is really flimsy, and obviously the fact that he's written this himself is probably why that's really flimsy and why it's unlikely to succeed. The biggest issue probably is this, where Billy Mitchell says, Karl Jobst is engaged in serious illegal activity before and during his bankruptcy process. I may take him back to court. And this was on June 24th. And Karl asked the bankruptcy trustee, have I engaged in an illegal activity? And the bankruptcy trustee was like, no. And then the bankruptcy trustee contacted Billy and said, can you give me evidence of any of this illegal activity so I can look into it so that we can substantiate what you're saying? And Billy never gave him that evidence. Would this hold up as like an actual malice claim in court for defamation? I don't know. I don't think so. But if you want to go read this whole thing, I mean, it's here. It's on Court Listener. You can just search Billy or Carl's name and you'll be able to find it. This just looks fucking stupid. It just looks silly. It looks like sour grapes that you've lost and you owe this guy a bunch of money. Now you're going to take him to court for the same thing. And there is an ultimate irony here that the initial start of these claims is that Billy reposted a Reddit post that was wrong, which is funnily enough how Karl ended up losing a defamation case because he used a Reddit source that was wrong. So if he ends up winning, time really is a flat circle because they're doing, it is literally the Spider-Man meme. They're just pointing at each other because they're doing the same thing. The difference here, of course, is that Billy used lawyers that he paid hundreds of thousands of dollars in an Australian court that's easier to win defamation with an actual provably incorrect statement in a court that cares about that. Karl is now suing him for hurting my feelings and some things that likely aren't going to hold up in an American court in Florida while representing himself. As this gets more complicated, he's going to need to pay a lawyer. And how is he going to pay a lawyer? Because he says that he's bankrupt and has no money and his YouTube channel makes no money and he has loads of money and liabilities for his mortgage, of which he has 2 houses that he owes like $1.3 million on combined. This is just fucking stupid. It's really stupid because if your chief concern is, I don't have any money and you've damaged my reputation, fighting a lawsuit you're almost certainly going to lose and owe more money afterwards, and he's going to make you look worse in the public's opinion, is certainly not a way to claw back credibility or opinion that you say is hurting your opportunities to generate revenue on your YouTube channel, which is doing fucking fine, by the way. Your YouTube channel is still getting hundreds of thousands, millions of views per video since this lawsuit concluded. So either way, thanks for watching as always. Hopefully this was informative in some way. And yeah, check out links in the video description if you want to buy something from GameStop. Use my discount code right there next to it. You get a discount, I get a kickback. And Patreon if you want to support my content. Suggest stuff you want to see me cover in Discord. And see you next time. Stay safe. We're out. Peace.